Hello team players! So, as some of you may know, as of recording this video, the Battlecry Playtest has officially come out. So today I want to talk about the Commander class. Let's dive in. For starters, they're an intelligence-based class and get 8 plus their Constitution modifier in hit points. For proficiencies, they're expert in perception, reflex, and will saves, but only trained in fortitude saves. Which is honestly pretty interesting. I think this is the only martial class in Pathfinder 2e that does not start off as expert in fortitude saves. So while this class does want to be on the front lines, you are going to have to be careful about things like poisons and diseases. For skills, they get training in society and warfare lore, which that warfare lore is actually really important, as we'll find out later. And they're also trained in other skills equal to 2 plus their intelligence modifier, which effectively means they get 8 skills to start off with. Well, most commanders will anyway. And of course, like most martials, they're trained in simple weapons, martial weapons, and unarmed attacks. But another thing that's pretty surprising about the commander is that they are trained in all armor. I think most people, including myself, expected them to just be trained in medium armor. But they do want to be on the front lines so that their party members can take advantage of their tactics, which I'll get to in a second here. So having access to heavy armor is going to help a lot. They're also trained in Commander Class DC, which is actually pretty important for this class. When we look at the class features of the Commander, a lot of it is pretty basic, but the first one we need to look at is the Commander's Banner. You begin play with a custom banner that you use to signal your allies when using tactics. This banner can either be attached to a shield or a weapon, or be affixed to a pole and held in one hand. Feats and abilities with the banner trait require you to be holding your banner or holding the weapon or shield that it's affixed to. As long as your banner is visible, you and all allies within 30 feet of it gain a +1 bonus to your will saves and DCs against fear effects. However, should your banner be destroyed or stolen, all allies within 30 feet are frightened 1. Some abilities allow you to place your banner in a certain way. Doing so means all banner abilities originate from where your banner is, not from where you are. For your tactics, you begin play with a folio containing 4 tactics. These are combat techniques and coordinated maneuvers that allow your allies to respond when you signal them. When you gain the Expert, Master, and Legendary Tactician abilities, you can add more powerful tactics to your folio. Each day during your daily preparations, you can choose 2 tactics from your folio and drill them in alongside your allies. You can do this with a number of allies equal to 2 plus your intelligence modifier. Doing this allows you to use those tactics alongside your allies in combat. These allies are referred to as your squad mates. Even if you signal an ally to use a tactic, they get to choose whether or not they follow that tactic. You can use more than 1 tactic per round, but each ally can only respond to 1 tactic per round, regardless of source. You can also gain new tactics by way of the Tactical Expansion feats. However, since the signals for each tactic are unique to each commander, there is typically no benefit to using or stealing another commander's folio. But you can train with another commander to retrain one of the tactics in your folio to another tactic that they know. At level 1, you also gain the Drilled Reactions ability. This allows you to grant an ally that would benefit from one of your tactics an extra reaction. However, that reaction can only be used to follow your tactic, and is lost if not used. And finally, for level 1 abilities, commanders also get the shield block reaction for free, allowing them to block damage with their shields. And of course, commander feats as normal for marshals. At level 3, with warfare expertise, you become an expert in warfare lore. In addition, you can use warfare lore to recall knowledge about most creatures. However, you can only use it to determine whether they can be reasoned with, their most notable offensive abilities, and or which of their saving throws is the lowest. The GM decides whether you can ask other questions based on the situation. In addition, if you can see at least one opponent when you roll initiative, you can use warfare lore for that initiative. At level 5, you get military expertise, allowing you to become an expert in simple martial and unarmed attacks, and gain the critical specialization effect of any weapon that you are an expert in. And of course, at level 7, you get your expert tactician, which increases your commander class DC to experts, and of course allows you to add 1 tactic to your folio. In addition, you can now prepare up to 3 tactics per day, and you become a master in warfare lore. And of course, you gain the standard weapon specialization. Level 9 is when you become an expert in fortitude saves, and at level 11, you become an expert in all armor, as well as the armor specialization effects of medium and heavy armor. Commanding will, it makes you a master in will saves, and gives you auto crit successes on will saves. At level 13, you become a master in perception, as well as in all simple martial and unarmed attacks. At level 15, you get Battlefield Intuition, which is Master in and auto crit successes on reflex save. You also get the standard Greater Weapon Specialization and Master Tactician, which of course is Master in Commander Class DC, as well as a new tactic, as well as Legendary Proficiency in Warfare Lore, as well as the ability to prepare 4 tactics instead of 3. At 17th is Master in Armor, and at 19th is Legendary Tactician. Commander Class DC to Legendary, and another tactic for your folio, as well as the ability to prepare 5 tactics per day rather than 4. Okay, now we can talk about tactics. I'm going to start by talking about the mobility tactics that you can pick at level 1, then we'll move on to the offensive tactics, and then the higher level ones. Let's start with defensive retreat. For 2 actions, you can signal all allies who can see or hear your signal, and each of them can step 3 times as a free action. However, each step must take them further away from at least one hostile creature, and can only take them towards a hostile creature if that's the only way they can get further away, such as if they're surrounded. This one's pretty good. There are far too many people that don't realize that running away is an effective tactic sometimes. I personally would much rather run away and live to fight another day than get TPK. And this particular tactic actually makes that a lot easier. Next, for our mobility tactics, we have Form Up. For 1 action, you can signal all creatures affected by your commander's banner, and they can each stride up to their movement as a reaction. However, they must end their movements within your banner's aura. This is a fantastic way of getting all your marshals in one area, which can be useful in certain situations. It's a little situational because you do have to be careful about putting all your allies in one area, especially if you're going up against a spellcaster. But having all your allies in one area can be incredibly useful, especially if your enemies are all in one area as well. With mountaineering training, you can signal all allies for 1 action, and they each gain a climb speed of 20 feet until the end of your next turn. Again, situational here, but it can be an incredibly useful tactic in and out of combat, especially if you're in mountainous areas a lot. In addition, if you have this tactic prepared, you can use warfare lore instead of athletics to climb. We also have naval training, which is the exact same thing except for a swim speed. And the final mobility tactic is passage of lines. For 1 action, all allies can swap places with an adjacent ally as a free action that does not trigger reactions. But obviously, an ally can't swap into a place where it couldn't fit, but if they're swapping places with a larger ally, they can swap places into any space that ally occupied, as long as they remain adjacent after the swap. This tactic can be incredibly useful, as most of the time you're going to use this to get spellcasters out of the way of marshals and put marshals exactly where they want to be. And that's within reach of that enemy. Of course, the allies have to be adjacent to each other, so it is a little situational, but it's still a great tactic. Okay, now we can talk about the offensive tactics that you can get at level 1. Starting with coordinated maneuvers. For one action, you can signal one squad mate. This tactic allows that squad mate to step as a free action. If they end this movement next to an enemy, they can attempt to reposition that enemy as a reaction. This one's pretty good too. Just allowing an ally to step on your turn for one action is pretty darn good. Spellcasters can move away from enemies, and marshals can move towards enemies and attempt to move them into flanking positions. This is a great tactic to use to help your allies' action economy. Next we've got double team. For 2 actions, you can allow a squad mate to shove or reposition an enemy within their reach. If the maneuver is successful and the target is moved next to you or a second squad mate, you or the second squad mate can make a strike against that target as a reaction. This is one of the best tactics here because it essentially allows you to move a target into a flanking position and allows you or one of your allies to basically get a reactive strike on it, which is very nice. Shoving and repositioning can be very effective, and this allows allies to do it on your turn, which means no multiple attack penalty either. Next we have another great one with End It. In order to use this tactic, you and your allies must outnumber the enemies, and you or an ally must have knocked an opponent down to 0 hit points since the start of your last turn. You allow yourself and each ally under your commander's banner to step directly towards a hostile creature that you or they can observe. After this movement, any hostile creature within 10 feet of you or one of your squad mates must make a will save against your class DC. Should they fail, they are fleeing for 1 round. Should they critically fail on their save, then they're fleeing for 1 round and frightened 2. Unfortunately, this does have the incapacitation trait, but this is still a fantastic option. As remember, the fleeing condition is not forced movement, which means anyone with reactive strike who is in reach of an enemy will get it. Also, that frightened 2 on a critical failure is actually really good as well. This is also a good way of ending a fight, especially if the party's really low on health, as enemies that are running away for 1 round might just continue to run after that. Overall, fantastic tactic here. Now let's talk about one that's pretty good with Pincer Attack. For 1 action, you allow all squad mates affected by your commander's banner to step as a free action. If any of your allies end their movement next to an enemy, that enemy is off guard against melee attacks from you and any of your squad mates until the start of your next turn. This is great because they don't even get a defense against it. And this is if any of your allies move up to the target. This also does work with melee spell attack rolls. If your enemy has a high fortitude and reflex DC, but you want to make them off guard to all of your allies, this is the way you want to do it. With the reload tactic, for 1 action, you can allow all allies that are affected by your commander's banner to reload as a reaction. This one is really good if you've got a bunch of people using reload ranged weapons like crossbows and firearms, but if you don't, I would not take this one. This tactic also works with siege weapons if you're part of a siege weapon crew. With the shields up tactic, for 1 action, you can allow all allies affected by your commander's banner to raise a shield as a reaction. Any squad mates that are using a weapon with the parry trait can use that trait as a free action. And finally, for level 1 tactics, we have Strike Hard. Choose 1 squad mate who can see or hear your signal. That ally can make a strike as a reaction. Overall, I do think that most of these level 1 tactics are pretty good. There's only a few of them that are pretty situational, like mountaineering training and naval training. Okay, now let's talk about higher level tactics that you can take when you get the expert, master, and legendary tactician ability, starting with Piranha Assaults. For one action, you can select one creature within 60 feet. Anytime you or one of your allies that are affected by your commander's banner attack and deal damage of a type that the creature resists, they ignore an amount of that creature's resistance equal to your level until the beginning of your next turn. This one is fantastic for marshals. There are a lot of creatures in Pathfinder 2e that resist physical attacks. And remember, this isn't just strikes, this also works on spells. Unfortunately, this doesn't work on immunities, but I still highly recommend this tactic. For expert tactics, we also have Stupefying Raid. For 2 action, you can allow up to 2 allies to stride up to their speed as a reaction. Each enemy that they are adjacent to at any point during that movement must make a will saving throw against your class DC or become stupefied 1 for 1 round, or stupefied 2 if they get a critical failure. This one isn't as good as the first one. Sad to say, this one is only really good if you're going up against a bunch of spellcasters. It's okay otherwise, because it does lower their will save, so a bard could definitely take advantage of this. But otherwise, it's pretty situational. For master tactics, we're going to start with Demoralizing Charm. This allows 2 squad mates that are affected by your commander's banner to stride towards an enemy they can see as a free action. If they end their movement next to an enemy, they can make a strike as a reaction. For each of these strikes that hits, the target must make a will saving throw against your class DC or be frightened 1, or frightened 2 on a critical failure. If both of these strikes are against the same enemy, the target takes a -1 penalty on its saving throw against this effect, or -2 if either of those strikes are critical hits. This is fantastic if you've got a bunch of melee attackers in the party, as you allow 2 allies to stride up to an enemy, and that's as a free action, meaning they don't have to move up on their turn, which is huge, and if any of the targets hit, they have to make a will save against being frightened. And frightened is one of the best conditions you can put on an enemy in this system. And if both your allies go up against the same enemy, then they take a penalty on their save against this. Great tactic here, I highly recommend. Next we come to the tactic that you guys may have seen on Twitter, Ready, Aim, Fire. This allows all allies that are affected by your commander's banner to interact to draw a ranged weapon and interact to reload, both as free actions, and then make a ranged attack against an enemy that both you and they can observe as a reaction. In addition, if one of your squad mates knows or has a cantrip prepared with a range of at least 30 feet, they can cast that cantrip as a reaction targeting an enemy that both you and they are observing, instead of taking the normal actions granted by this tactic. Unfortunately, this one is a little more situational because it requires everybody to make ranged attack roll. However, because this tactic allows you to immediately swap to a ranged weapon and reload it as free actions, this could be incredibly useful. In the end, it really depends on your party whether this is useful or not, as your melee attackers might not have great decks. And now we come to the legendary tactics, both of which are actually pretty insane. Starting with Executioner's Volley, which can be used once per 10 minutes. For 2 actions, you allow all your squad mates that are affected by your commander's banner to make a ranged attack as a reaction. All these ranged attacks must target one creature you designate. Combine the damage from all these attacks for the purposes of weaknesses and resistances. If these attacks are against a living creature, they are death effects and gain the death traits. Meaning if you knock them down to 0 hit points, they immediately die. And should the target die as a result of this tactic, all other enemies within the designated area of your commander's banner must make a will saving throw against your class DC or become frightened too. The best part about this tactic is no incapacitation trait, which makes this a fantastic option to use against bosses. However, because this requires ranged attacks, it's not as good. And unlike Ready, Aim, Fire, this does not allow you to switch weapons as a free action. So unfortunately, your allies have to already be wielding ranged weapons to use them. But this is an insane option if you've already got a bunch of ranged attackers in your party. And again, unfortunately, this doesn't work with spells. It requires ranged strike. And of course, you still have to hit. So this isn't as good as I thought it was, but if you already got a bunch of ranged attackers in the party, this one is actually pretty fantastic. Valkyrie's Charge, on the other hand, is pretty insane for any party. For 3 actions, you restore 80 hit points to all squad mates affected by your commander's banner. If an affected ally was unconscious due to being knocked to 0 hit points, they can immediately stand up and pick up any dropped weapons. Then each affected ally can stride up to twice their speed towards an enemy that they can see. If they end their movement with an enemy within their reach, they can attempt to strike that enemy as a reaction. And of course, you and your allies can use Valkyrie's Charge with burrowing, climbing, flying, or swimming if you have the corresponding movement type. This one is a fantastic way of getting your allies back up in a fight. Even at 19th level, when you can pick this up, healing all of your allies for 80 hit points is actually pretty insane. And not only that, but if they're at 0 hit points, they stand up and can pick up their weapons as basically free action. And remember that allies don't have to move as part of this tactic. They can move if they want to. Meaning spellcasters can stay where they are, as well as ranged attackers, but melee attackers can move up if they want to. And strike the enemy if they come within reach of them. Plus, this tactic allows them to move up to twice their speed. So even if the battle has moved pretty significantly from where an ally went down, they can still get back in the fight pretty easily with this tactic. And this is essentially giving them 2 free move actions, although it does have to be towards an enemy. Another fantastic tactic here, highly recommend. Okay, overall for the commander, there's only one thing I really wish they would do. Unfortunately, a lot of the tactics are really built for melee attackers and some ranged attackers, but not really spellcasters. Don't get me wrong, I do think that spellcasters can take advantage of some of these tactics, especially the ones that allow them to step. But unfortunately, most of the tactics they have in this playtest require strikes and not spells. And I think that's a real shame. I think the commander would be much better if it had more than one tactic that allowed a spell rather than a strike, as then it would be able to help out a lot more parties than just those that just have martials. Hopefully, when the class actually comes out, it will have some options that help out spellcasters and not just martials. I mean, I understand it's going to be in a book about martials, but still, that doesn't mean it can't help out spellcasters. But if you guys are excited for the feats video coming, let me know by leaving a like on this video. And don't worry, I am going to be covering the Guardian eventually. In fact, that's going to be after I get done with the commander. Also, let me know in the comments if you guys want me to do a teamwork build with these 2 classes. And of course, be sure to become a member or join me on my Patreon page if you want my videos early. Just like these people here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.